The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows of the Carter home. Ethan stood at the counter, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner. The familiar rhythm of the knife against the cutting board filled the quiet kitchen, broken only by the occasional tap of his daughter's fingers on her phone screen. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her dark hair falling forward as she scrolled through her social media feed. The peaceful routine suddenly shattered when she gasped. "Dad, look at this." Ethan glanced up from the carrots he was slicing. "What is it, sweetheart?" The hospital posted an emergency request. Lily held up her phone, her brown eyes wide with concern. "They need rare blood donors right away. Someone's life depends on it." Ethan's knife paused mid-chop. His chest tightened as memories of hospital corridors flooded back. "I don't know, Lily." "Dad." Lily's voice softened. "Mom always said we help when we can. Remember?" The words hit him like a physical touch. Emily had lived by that principle, always the first to help a neighbor or volunteer at the local shelter. He set down his knife, running a hand through his graying hair. "Please?" Lily pressed. "We could actually save someone's life." Ethan looked at the half-prepared dinner on the counter, then back at his daughter's earnest face. "The vegetables can wait," he finally said. "Let me grab my jacket." The smile that lit up Lily's face made his decision worth it already. She jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair in her excitement. "I'll get mine too." Minutes later, they were in Ethan's old pickup truck, heading toward the hospital. The familiar streets of their small town passed by as dusk settled in, painting the sky in soft purples and deep blues. Lily fiddled with the radio until she found an oldies station. "Remember when Mom used to sing this one?" she asked as Sweet Caroline came on. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he managed to smile. She knew every word. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but that never stopped her. "Neither could you," Lily teased, and they both laughed. The hospital parking lot was surprisingly full for the evening hours. They found a spot near the back, and Ethan tried to ignore the familiar knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't been here since. "Come on, Dad," Lily encouraged, already opening her door. "The sooner we get in there, the sooner someone gets help." The emergency department's waiting room buzzed with activity. A tired-looking receptionist handed Ethan a clipboard full of forms, and he settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair to fill them out. Lily sat beside him, offering helpful reminders about his medical history. Date of last physical. "That was in March, remember?" Ethan nodded, working through the pages. His pen hesitated over the emergency contact information. Even after all these years, it felt wrong to cross out Emily's name and replace it. A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan looked up to see a woman about his age, with kind eyes and dark curly hair touched with silver at the temples. Her name tag read, "Grace Whitmore, RN. Right this way," she said warmly. "Lily, you can wait right here if you'd like. We'll take good care of your dad." Lily gave him an encouraging thumbs up as Nurse Grace led him through the double doors. The familiar antiseptic smell made his steps falter slightly. "First-time donor?" Grace asked, guiding him to a reclining chair. "That obvious, huh?" She smiled, preparing his arm with practiced efficiency. "Most people are nervous their first time. But you're doing a wonderful thing. This donation could save someone's life tonight." Her gentle manner helped ease his tension. As she worked, she kept up a soothing stream of conversation, asking about Lily and his work. Before he knew it, the donation was complete. "There we go," Grace said, applying pressure to the site. "You did great. Just rest here for a few minutes, and I'll bring you some juice and cookies." Ethan hadn't expected to feel so accomplished. He lay back in the chair, flexing his arm carefully as instructed. Through the window, he could see the last rays of sunset painting the sky in brilliant orange. Grace returned with apple juice and packaged cookies. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I expected," he admitted, accepting the juice. "Thank you for making it easier." Something flickered in Grace's expression. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. She glanced around the quiet donation area, then pulled up a chair next to him. "Mr. Carter, Ethan," she began, her voice soft but intense. "There's something I need to tell you." The serious look in her dark eyes made him set down his juice. "Is everything all right?" Grace clasped her hands together, and Ethan noticed they were trembling slightly. The patient who needs this blood. She's my daughter. Ethan sat in the recovery chair, sipping his apple juice through a bendy straw. His arm felt a bit sore where the needle had gone in, but otherwise, he was fine. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the mint-green walls. Nurse Grace Whitmore approached him, her tennis shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. Something in her expression made him straighten up. Her warm brown eyes held both gratitude and urgency. "Mr. Carter," she said, clasping her hands together. "Would you mind speaking with me privately for a moment?" Ethan glanced at Lily, who was absorbed in her phone across the room. "Sure," he said, standing carefully. "Everything okay?" Grace led him to a quiet corner of the donation area, partially hidden by a privacy screen. Up close, he could see the tiredness around her eyes, though her smile remained gentle. "I wanted to tell you something," she began, her voice soft but steady. "The blood you donated today, it went directly to my daughter Hannah. She was rushed in a few hours ago after having a severe allergic reaction at a friend's house." Grace's voice caught slightly. "The doctors needed your blood type immediately for her emergency surgery." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He'd known his donation would help someone, but knowing it was a young girl, someone's daughter, made it suddenly very real. "Island. Is she going to be okay?" Grace nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, thank goodness. She's stable now and resting. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery." She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Mr. Carter, I can't thank you enough. When we put out that call for donors, I prayed someone would come. You quite literally saved my daughter's life today." "I'm just glad I could help," Ethan said quietly, feeling both humbled and slightly uncomfortable with such heartfelt gratitude. "Actually, it was my daughter Lily who saw the post and insisted we come." "Dad?" As if on cue, Lily appeared around the privacy screen, her phone still in hand. "Everything okay?" Grace turned to her with a warm smile. "You must be Lily. I'm Nurse Grace Whitmore." She extended her hand, which Lily shook. "I was just telling your father what an important thing you both did today. You helped your dad make this choice, and because of that, my daughter Hannah is going to be all right." Lily's eyes widened. "Your daughter got Dad's blood? That's amazing." Her whole face lit up. "Is she our age? How is she doing?" "She's 15, Grace answered, "and she's doing much better now, thanks to you both." She glanced between father and daughter, then seemed to make a decision. "I know this might seem forward, but once Hannah's recovered and back home, I'd love to have you both over for dinner. Just a small thank you for what you've done for our family." Ethan felt himself tense slightly. It had been a long time since he'd accepted any social invitations, especially from someone he'd just met. But Lily was already bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Can we, Dad? Please?" He looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Grace's genuine smile. "That's very kind of you," he said carefully. "As long as it's not too much trouble." "Not at all," Grace assured him. She pulled a small notepad from her scrubs pocket and wrote down her number. "Here's my contact information. I'll call you once Hannah's home and feeling up to visitors." They said their goodbyes, Grace heading back to her duties, and Ethan gathering his jacket. As he and Lily walked through the hospital's automatic doors into the cool night air, their footsteps echoed in the quiet parking lot. Above them, stars dotted the clear sky like scattered diamonds. "This is so cool, Dad," Lily chattered as they walked to their car. "I mean, what are the chances? Your blood going directly to save someone our age? And now we get to meet them." She practically skipped beside him. "Maybe Hannah and I could be friends. Does she go to our school? I wonder if—" "Lily," Ethan said gently, "let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? Let's just let the girl recover first." But his daughter's excitement barely dimmed. She continued talking about the evening's events all the way to the car, her voice full of wonder and possibility. Ethan listened quietly, clicking his seatbelt into place. As he started the engine, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted tonight. What had started as a simple act of kindness had somehow become more complex, more personal. He hadn't planned on making connections when he walked into the hospital. He just wanted to help and go home. Looking at Lily's animated face in the passenger seat, he realized that sometimes life had other plans. He pulled out of the parking lot, the hospital's lights growing smaller in his rearview mirror, while his daughter's voice filled the car with dreams of new friendships and dinner plans. The night air felt different somehow, charged with possibility. As they drove home through the quiet streets, Ethan gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, trying to ground himself in the familiar motion of driving, even as he sensed that this evening had changed more than he'd expected. The evening sun cast long shadows across Grace's front lawn as Ethan and Lily stood on her porch. The modest ranch-style house had cheerful yellow siding and white trim, with potted flowers adding splashes of color. Ethan shifted the warm casserole dish in his hands while Lily smoothed her dress for the 10th time. "Stop fidgeting," Ethan whispered, though his own stomach was doing flips. He hadn't been to dinner at someone's house in ages. The door opened, and Grace's warm smile greeted them. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the kindness in her eyes. "You made it. Please, come in." The house smelled of garlic bread and something Italian cooking. Family photos lined the walls of the entry hall, and soft music played from somewhere inside. Everything about the space felt welcoming and lived in. "I brought a green bean casserole," Ethan said, holding out the dish. "It's nothing fancy, but it's Dad's specialty," Lily piped up. "He only makes it for special occasions." Grace's face lit up. "That's so thoughtful. The kitchen's this way." "The kitchen's this way." They followed her through a cozy living room with well-worn furniture and shelves full of books. In the kitchen, Grace took the casserole and set it on the counter next to a bubbling pot of pasta sauce. "Hannah?" Grace called toward the hallway. "Our guests are here." Soft footsteps approached, and a teenage girl appeared in the doorway. She was thin and pale, clearly still recovering, but carried herself with quiet grace. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her warm brown eyes looked nervously at the visitors. "Hi," Hannah said softly. "Thank you for what you did, Mr. Carter." Ethan smiled gently. "Please, call me Ethan. And I'm just glad I could help." Lily had been bouncing on her toes, eager to meet the girl whose life her father had helped save. But when Hannah stepped into the light, Lily went completely still, her face drained of color, and her hand reached instinctively for her father's arm. If anyone noticed Lily's reaction, they didn't show it. Grace was busy pulling chairs out from the kitchen table. "Please, sit. Everything's almost ready." The table was set with mismatched plates that somehow looked perfect together. Grace served generous portions of spaghetti and meatballs, and conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Hannah gradually opened up, especially when Lily asked about her art supplies visible on a nearby desk. "I love to draw," Hannah explained, her whole face lighting up. "Mom got me these amazing new colored pencils for my birthday." "That's so cool," Lily said, finding her voice again. "I'm terrible at art, but I love looking at other people's work. Could I see some of yours sometime?" Hannah nodded eagerly, and just like that, the ice was broken between the girls. The adults found their own rhythm too. Grace asked about Ethan's work as a contractor, and he found himself sharing funny stories about renovation disasters that had them all laughing. And then the cat jumped right into the wet cement. Ethan finished one tale, and Grace wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "Oh my goodness," she said, catching her breath. "That reminds me of the time I had to chase a patient's escaped therapy rabbit through the hospital." The conversation turned to the challenges of single parenting. Grace described juggling night shifts with Hannah's school schedule. "The hardest part is when she's sick," Grace admitted. "Being a nurse doesn't help when you're worried about your own child." Ethan nodded in understanding. "I remember the first time Lily got a fever after I was on my own. I must have called the pediatrician 5 times in one night." "Dad," Lily protested, but she was smiling. After dinner, the girls cleared the table while Grace packed up leftover casserole for Ethan and Lily to take home. Hannah showed Lily her sketchbook, their heads bent together over the kitchen table. "Would you like to see the garden before you go?" Grace asked Ethan. "The evening primrose is just starting to bloom." They stepped out onto the back patio, where sweet-smelling flowers were indeed opening their petals to the twilight. Cricket song filled the cool evening air. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, though it wasn't cold. "Ethan, there's something I should tell you." He turned to face her, noting the sudden tension in her shoulders. I knew Sarah, your wife. We went to high school together." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan's chest tightened at the mention of Sarah's name. "You never said anything at the hospital," he managed. "I know." Grace looked down at her hands. "It's complicated. I promise I'll explain everything someday. I needed you to know." Before Ethan could respond, Lily appeared at the sliding glass door. "Dad, we should probably head home. I still have that math homework to finish." The drive home was quiet except for the soft hum of the car engine. Streetlights swept across their faces in steady rhythm. Ethan's mind was spinning with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Finally, Lily's whisper broke the silence. "Dad, Hannah looks just like Mom." "Is that even possible?" Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dark curls, the same warm eyes, even some of the same mannerisms, but he couldn't find the words to respond to his daughter's question. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Both father and daughter lost in their own thoughts about the evening that had changed everything. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Ethan sat at his familiar spot, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Steam rose in lazy spirals while he stared at nothing in particular. Lily's words from last night echoing in his mind. "Dad, Hannah looks just like Mom." He took a slow sip of coffee, trying to push away the unsettling feeling. The resemblance was there, sure, but maybe that's all it was. Just one of those strange coincidences life throws at you sometimes. Besides, Hannah was such a sweet kid, and Grace had been nothing but kind to them. His phone sat on the table next to his mug. He'd promised to check on Hannah, and despite his lingering unease, he knew it was the right thing to do. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the phone and dialed Grace's number. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, even over the phone. "Hi, Grace, it's Ethan. Just wanted to see how Hannah's doing this morning." "That's so thoughtful of you." He could hear the smile in her voice. "She's much better. The doctors say she can probably go back to school tomorrow." Their conversation flowed easily from there, moving beyond just checking on Hannah. Grace's voice grew softer as she opened up about the challenges she faced. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," she admitted. "Being a single mom, it's not what I planned for Hannah." "I know exactly what you mean," Ethan replied, thinking of his own struggles with Lily. "Every day, I question if I'm making the right choices. It's especially hard watching Hannah deal with things I can't fix," Grace continued. "Some people in town, they're not always kind about her being biracial. The other day, a girl at school made a comment that had Hannah crying all evening." Ethan felt a protective anger rise in his chest. "That's not right. No kid should have to deal with that. Hannah's strong, but sometimes I wish I could make it easier for her." Over the next week, their families seemed to naturally gravitate together. Lily invited Hannah over after school to study, and soon their kitchen table was covered with textbooks and notebooks while the girls worked on their homework together. Hannah's quiet presence seemed to bring out a gentler side in Lily that Ethan hadn't seen in a while. One afternoon, while the girls were sprawled on the living room floor working on a history project, Ethan and Grace sat at the kitchen table with fresh coffee between them. Their conversations had become longer, deeper, touching on hopes and fears they rarely shared with others. "You know what amazes me?" Grace said, watching their daughters through the doorway. "How quickly they've bonded. Hannah's always been so shy, but with Lily, she just lights up." Ethan nodded, noticing how Hannah's usual reserved demeanor had softened around Lily. "Lily's been different too. More settled somehow. I was worried about Hannah going back to school after everything," Grace admitted. "But having Lily there has made such a difference." Yesterday, when that same girl tried to make another comment, Lily stood right up and shut it down. "She did?" Ethan felt a surge of pride. She told the girl that family comes in all colors, and anyone who can't see that needs to get their eyes checked. Grace laughed softly. "Your daughter has quite a way with words." Their conversation turned to ways they might help make a broader change in the community. The idea for the blood drive came naturally, a way to turn their personal connection into something bigger. "Think about it," Grace said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "If we could get people to donate regularly, maybe meeting each other, talking, it could help break down some of these barriers." "Close there. Pay kindness forward," Ethan quoted, remembering something his late wife used to say. We could work with the hospital, maybe get some local businesses involved. They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, their excitement building. Grace's medical knowledge and Ethan's connections in the community seemed to complement each other perfectly. As they talked, their chairs had gradually moved closer together, their shoulders nearly touching as they leaned over the notepad where Grace was jotting down ideas. The afternoon slipped into evening, and soon it was time for Grace and Hannah to head home. The girls hugged goodbye, making plans for their next study session, while Ethan walked Grace to her car parked in the driveway. The spring evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting a soft glow over the quiet neighborhood. Their footsteps crunched softly on the gravel as they walked side by side. "Thanks for today," Grace said softly. "For everything, really. These past few days have meant so much to Hannah. And to me." "We're glad you're here," Ethan replied, his voice equally quiet in the evening air. They reached her car, and Grace turned to face him. In the gathering dusk, her eyes seemed to hold a warmth that made Ethan's heart beat a little faster. As she moved to open her car door, their hands brushed accidentally. Instead of pulling away immediately, their fingers lingered for a moment, the touch sending an unexpected current through them both. They drew back at the same time, each looking away shyly. Ethan cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his racing pulse. Grace tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I'll call you tomorrow about the blood drive plans?" she asked, her voice slightly unsteady. "Yes, tomorrow," Ethan agreed, trying to sound normal despite the way his hands still tingled from their brief touch. The morning air held the crisp promise of fall as Ethan unfolded the card table in the town square. Around him, maple trees dotted the brick-paved plaza with splashes of red and gold. Grace stood beside him, sorting through a stack of sign-up sheets, her dark hair caught by the breeze. "Here, let me help with that," she said, grabbing the other end of the banner that read, "Give life. Donate blood." Together, they secured it to the front of their booth. Lily and Hannah huddled nearby, giggling as they organized piles of bright flyers. The two girls had become inseparable over the past weeks. Watching them, Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. "Okay, troops," Grace called out with a playful smile. "Operation Save Lives is officially launched." The girls scattered across the square, approaching Saturday morning shoppers with their flyers and bright smiles. Ethan watched as Hannah, usually so shy, found her confidence alongside Lily. She stood straighter, her voice carrying clearly across the plaza as she explained the importance of blood donation to an elderly couple. "She's really blossoming," Ethan remarked softly. Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "Having you and Lily in our lives, it's changed everything." Their fingers brushed as they both reached for more paperwork. Neither pulled away. The simple touch sent a current of electricity up Ethan's arm. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of people approached their booth. Many knew Ethan from his handyman work around town, and word had spread about how his donation had saved Hannah's life. "You're the one who helped the Whitmore girl?" Mrs. Peterson, who owned the local bakery, asked as she filled out a donor form. "Such a blessing. We need more kindness like that in this world." By noon, their sign-up sheets were filling up nicely. Lily and Hannah had convinced half their class to volunteer, along with 2 teachers. The girls returned to the booth, cheeks flushed with success. "Dad!" Lily bounced on her toes. "Can we have Hannah and Grace over for dinner tonight, to celebrate?" Ethan glanced at Grace, who smiled warmly. "I'd like that," she said. Later that evening, the Carter house filled with the aroma of garlic and herbs as Ethan and Lily prepared their family's secret recipe pasta sauce. Hannah perched on a kitchen stool, watching them work with fascination. "The trick," Ethan explained, stirring the sauce, "is adding just a pinch of cinnamon. Sounds weird, but trust me." Grace leaned against the counter, wineglass in hand. "I never would have guessed you were such a chef." "Dad's full of surprises," Lily said, setting the table with their good dishes. "You should see him bake cookies." The kitchen rang with laughter and casual conversation as they worked together, moving around each other in an easy dance. When they finally sat down to eat, Ethan raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to the amazing people who make them possible." Everyone clinked glasses, even the girls with their sparkling cider. Hannah's eyes shone as she looked around the table, and Ethan noticed Grace discreetly wiping away a tear. After dinner, the girls disappeared upstairs to Lily's room, their excited chatter floating down the stairwell. Ethan and Grace cleaned up, working in comfortable silence. She washed while he dried, their elbows touching occasionally. "Thank you," Grace said suddenly, handing him a plate. "For everything. For saving Hannah, for accepting us, for—" She trailed off, looking up at him. Ethan set down the dish towel. In the soft kitchen light, Grace's dark eyes held a universe of feeling. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. Time seemed to slow as they drew closer. When their lips met, it felt as natural as breathing. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, filled with months of unspoken longing. Grace's hands gripped his shoulders while his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Grace's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled that radiant smile that had been haunting Ethan's dreams. "It feels like we were meant to find each other," she whispered. Ethan smiled back, but something flickered in his chest, a shadow of unease. Grace had known his wife, had some connection to their past that she still hadn't explained. But before he could dwell on it, laughter erupted from upstairs, and the moment passed like leaves scattered in an autumn wind. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church Hall, casting rainbow patterns across the bustling crowd. Red and white balloons bobbed against the ceiling, and hand-painted signs directed donors to different stations. The morning air hummed with conversation and purpose. Ethan adjusted his tie, watching volunteers set up the last of the donation chairs. His heart swelled at the turnout. Nearly 50 people had already lined up outside before the doors opened. Grace moved efficiently between the stations, her nurse's instincts showing as she checked equipment and briefed the medical team. "Dad!" Lily called, waving from the refreshment table where she and Hannah arranged cookies and juice boxes. "Everything's ready over here." The church hall doors opened, and people filed in. Ethan recognized faces from all over town, teachers from Lily's school, regulars from the hardware store, even the mayor had shown up. Each person signed in at the registration desk, where Grace's warm smile put nervous first-time donors at ease. As the morning progressed, Ethan helped guide people to available chairs, sharing his own story whenever someone looked uncertain. "I was scared too," he'd say with a gentle smile. "But knowing you might save someone's life, there's nothing quite like it." Around noon, Grace touched his arm. "It's time for your speech," she whispered. Her eyes sparkled with pride, and Ethan felt his nervousness fade. She believed in him, and somehow that made all the difference. He stepped up to the small podium they'd set up near the front of the hall. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward him expectantly. Ethan cleared his throat. "A few months ago, I was just a guy making dinner when my daughter showed me a post about someone needing blood," he began, catching Lily's encouraging nod from the crowd. "I almost didn't come. Almost let fear stop me from doing what was right." He paused, looking at Grace. "But that decision changed my life in ways I never expected." The hall grew quieter still as Ethan continued. "One act of kindness ripples outward. My donation saved Hannah's life." He gestured to where she stood beside Lily, "And through that, I found new friendship, new purpose, and," he smiled at Grace, "new love. That's why we're all here today, because compassion has the power to transform us." Applause filled the hall. Grace stepped forward to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. The moment felt perfect, a celebration of everything they'd built together. Then, a sharp voice cut through the crowd's warmth. "Well, I never." Mrs. Porter, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, pushed through the crowd toward them. Her face was flushed with indignation. "Grace Whitmore, how dare you stand up there like that, pretending you're some stranger who just happened to meet him?" The hall fell silent. Grace's hand tightened in Ethan's. "Mrs. Porter," Grace started, her voice strained. "Please, don't you Mrs. Porter me, young lady." The elderly woman turned to Ethan, her voice rising. "Did she tell you? Did she tell you she's Margaret's sister? Your wife's sister?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He dropped Grace's hand, stepping back. What? Grace reached for him, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan, I can explain. But the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Ethan saw Lily's face, pale with shock, as Hannah tried to comfort her. The rainbow patterns from the windows suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. Is it true? He asked Grace, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace nodded, tears now falling freely. Yes. Margaret was my sister. We hadn't spoken in years before she died. I wanted to tell you, but you didn't. The words came out flat, hollow. Ethan looked around the hall, at the balloons, the signs, all their work together, and felt like he was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. All this time, you knew who I was, who Lily was, and you said nothing. Please let me explain, Grace pleaded, reaching for him again. Ethan stepped back further, shaking his head. The crowd's whispers grew louder, faces turning to watch the drama unfold. He caught fragments of conversations. Can you believe? All this time. Poor Ethan. I need to go, he managed, turning away from Grace's tear-stained face. Lily? His daughter stood frozen, looking between him and Grace with confused hurt in her eyes. Hannah held her hand, both girls seeming smaller somehow in the harsh fluorescent light. Now. Mrs. Porter started again, but someone finally pulled her away, murmuring about discretion and privacy. Ethan walked out of the church hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bright autumn day mocked the darkness spreading through his chest. He drove home in silence, Lily beside him, neither able to find words for the weight of betrayal. That night, after Lily had retreated to her room, Ethan sat alone at his kitchen table. The house felt emptier than it had in months. He pulled out his wallet and removed the photograph he always carried. Margaret on their wedding day, her smile radiant and free. The same smile he'd seen echoed in Grace's face so many times over the past weeks. Looking at the photograph now, he could see the resemblance he should have noticed before. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their cheeks. Sisters. His wife and Grace were sisters. Why didn't you tell me, Grace? He whispered to the empty kitchen, his voice breaking on her name. The photograph offered no answers. Only his wife's frozen smile, and the weight of secrets finally revealed. The morning sun filtered weakly through the faded kitchen curtains as Ethan stared at his phone, the device feeling foreign and heavy in his calloused hands. Grace's name flashed across the cracked screen for the 5th time that morning. Her contact photo, a candid shot from the blood drive where she was laughing at something Lily had said, now a painful reminder of simpler times. He pressed decline again, his thumb hovering over the red button as his hand trembled slightly from exhaustion and emotional strain. At the scratched wooden kitchen table, Lily pushed her cereal around the chipped ceramic bowl with mechanical movements, the Cheerios now soggy and forgotten, floating in lukewarm milk like tiny life preservers in a sea of indifference. The metallic scrape of her spoon against the bowl's worn bottom was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence that had settled between father and daughter like a thick fog. She's called 12 times since yesterday, Lily said finally, her voice tight with barely contained frustration and something deeper disappointment in her father's retreat from happiness. You can't ignore her forever, Dad. That's not fair to anyone. Ethan placed his phone face down on the chipped laminate counter with deliberate care, as if the device might explode if handled roughly. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in with each passing hour of silence. I just need time to think, honey. This changes everything. Think about what? Lily dropped her spoon with a sharp clatter that seemed to echo through the tense atmosphere. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, flashed with a fire that reminded Ethan painfully of Sarah in her passionate moments. About how Grace helped save Hannah's life? Or about how she makes you smile for the first time in forever? About how she brought light back into this house? The accusation hit him like a physical blow. It's not that simple, Lily. Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar pressure of a headache building behind his tired eyes. She lied to us. She was your mother's sister, your aunt, and she never said a word. Don't you understand what that means? Maybe she was scared. Lily's voice cracked with emotion, tears threatening to spill over. Did you ever think about that? About how hard it must have been for her too? About what it took for her to watch you fall in love with someone when she knew Mom's history? Ethan leaned against the counter, feeling the sharp edge dig into his back, grounding him in physical discomfort that matched his emotional turmoil. The weight of his daughter's words settled over him like a heavy blanket. I trusted her, Lily. We both did. And finding out like that, in front of everyone, with Mrs. Porter making it sound so. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice how exposed and foolish he'd felt. You're just scared, Lily said, pushing back her chair with enough force to scrape it against the linoleum floor. She stood up, her 15-year-old frame trembling with righteous anger and grief. You're scared because you actually felt happy again. And now you have an excuse to run away, to hide behind your grief like you always do. Fresh tears welled in her eyes, making them shine like stars. Mom would want you to be happy, Dad. She wouldn't want you to be alone forever, drowning in what-ifs and regrets. The mention of Sarah hit him like a sucker punch to the gut. Ethan closed his eyes, seeing his late wife's face as clearly as if she were standing in the kitchen with them. Her warm brown eyes, the way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking, the gentle way she'd touch his arm when she wanted to make a point. Across town, in Grace's modest rental home with its peeling paint and creaky floors, Hannah sat curled up on the second-hand living room couch, her legs tucked beneath her like a wounded bird seeking shelter. Her art supplies lay scattered on the coffee table, colored pencils, charcoal sticks, and her worn sketchbook all untouched for the first time in weeks. The creative spark that usually burned so bright in her had been extinguished by shame and confusion. Grace emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs, the scent of rich hot chocolate filling the air with artificial warmth. She set Hannah's mug carefully on a coaster, noting how her daughter's hands shook slightly as she reached for it. Dark circles shadowed Hannah's eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent replaying the disastrous revelation at the blood drive. I'm sorry, Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the old refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. If I hadn't gotten sick, if you hadn't needed his blood, if I hadn't looked so much like. She couldn't finish, couldn't voice the resemblance that had started this whole chain of events. Stop right there. Grace sat beside her daughter on the sagging couch cushions, pulling her close with fierce maternal protection. The faint scent of her hospital shampoo, antiseptic and clinical, clung to her hair, a reminder of the world she inhabited daily, where life and death decisions were routine. None of this is your fault, sweetie. Not one single bit of it. But everyone's talking about us at school. Hannah's shoulders trembled as she leaned into her mother's embrace. Kelly Martinez said her mom thinks we're trouble. And now Lily won't answer my texts. And Mr. Carter probably hates us both. Her voice broke on the last words, the fear of rejection cutting deep. He doesn't hate us, Grace said, though her own heart ached with each unanswered call, each text message left unread. She checked her phone again, still no response to her increasingly desperate attempts at communication. The silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. He's just processing. Sometimes adults need time to figure things out, to sort through complicated feelings. Why didn't you tell them sooner? Hannah asked, looking up at her mother with eyes that held too much wisdom for her 16 years, eyes that had seen too much hardship and disappointment. Before it got this far? Before we all cared so much? Grace's throat tightened with unshed tears and years of buried regret. The question she'd been dreading hung in the air between them like a sword. Because I was afraid, baby. Your Aunt Sarah and I. We had a complicated relationship. When she died, I carried so much regret, so many things left unsaid. She paused, struggling to find words that could explain years of pain and misunderstanding. Then meeting Ethan and Lily, it felt like a miracle, like a second chance at family. I just couldn't find the right moment to explain, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. The church bells of St. Mary's rang out across the small town as families filed into the century-old building for Sunday service, their voices creating a low murmur of conversation and greeting. Ethan sat alone in his usual pew, third from the back on the left side, feeling conspicuous in his solitude. Lily had declared herself too sick to attend, though they both knew her illness was emotional rather than physical. The weight of curious stares and whispered conversations felt like physical touches against his skin, each glance a reminder of his exposed vulnerability. He had always been a private man, content to live quietly on the edges of community life. Now he felt thrust into the spotlight, his personal business dissected and judged by people who barely knew him. Mrs. Porter, the elderly neighbor whose loose tongue had shattered his newfound happiness, sat 3 rows ahead, her gray head bent in what appeared to be fervent prayer. Her floral dress and carefully pinned hair gave her an air of respectability that masked the damage her words had caused. But others in the congregation were less subtle with their judgment, their whispered conversations carrying clearly in the hushed sanctuary. Keeping secrets like that from a grieving widower makes you wonder what else she's hiding. And with her daughter being mixed race, you know how some people feel about that. The words made Ethan's stomach turn with a mixture of disgust and shame. These were the same people who had praised the blood drive just days ago, who had called it a beautiful example of Christian charity and community spirit. Now their true colors showed through like paint bleeding through a fresh coat of primer, and Ethan felt a deep shame not at Grace's actions, but at his own silence in the face of their casual prejudice and cruelty. Pastor Mike's sermon focused on forgiveness and the healing power of grace, an irony that wasn't lost on Ethan, though he barely heard the words through the roar of his own tumultuous thoughts. The paper fan in his hands, decorated with a pastoral scene of Jesus and the children, was slowly being shredded by his restless fingers, torn to pieces as surely as his peace of mind had been destroyed. The familiar hymns washed over him without comfort, the voices of the congregation blending into a meaningless drone. Even Amazing Grace, Sarah's favorite, failed to move him. The words about being lost and found feeling like mockery in his current state of confusion. He slipped out before the final hymn, avoiding the usual post-service socializing that he had never enjoyed but had endured for Lily's sake. The thought of making small talk, of fielding questions about grace and the revelation, felt impossible to bear. Outside, gray clouds had rolled in while he'd been inside, matching his mood as he began the familiar walk home through streets that suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming. The sidewalks were nearly empty, most people still inside the church or enjoying their Sunday morning routines behind closed doors. A few early autumn leaves skittered across his path, driven by a wind that carried the promise of change and the chill of approaching winter. Ethan pulled his jacket closer, though the cold he felt came from within rather than without. His footsteps echoed against the cracked sidewalk with a lonely rhythm. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by a crushing burden of memories and conflicting emotions. Grace's radiant smile as they planned the blood drive together, their hands touching as they sorted donation forms. Hannah's shy but heartfelt thank you after her recovery, the way she'd hugged him with surprising strength. Lily's sharp accusation of his cowardice, her tears of frustration and disappointment. And underneath it all, threading through every thought and memory like a ghost refusing to be laid to rest, was Sarah, his late wife, Grace's estranged sister, whose presence seemed to hover between them all like an unresolved chord in a symphony. What would she think of this situation? What would she want him to do? The questions tormented him because he realized, with startling clarity, that he no longer knew the answers with certainty. The wind picked up as he turned onto his street, carrying the scent of approaching rain and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. Ethan hunched his shoulders against the chill, his heart feeling as heavy and oppressive as the storm clouds gathering overhead. He had thought he was ready to move forward, to embrace happiness and love again after 3 long years of grief and solitude. But now the path ahead seemed more uncertain than ever, clouded by secrets and shadows of a past he'd thought he understood. He reached his front porch just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, leaving dark spots on the weathered wood. Through the living room window, he could see Lily curled up in Sarah's old reading chair, a photo album spread across her lap, the one filled with pictures of her mother from childhood through their wedding day. The sight stopped him cold, his hand frozen on the brass doorknob that Sarah had picked out when they'd first bought the house. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him like a physical burden, each memory a stone added to an already crushing load. The pure joy of the blood drive, now tainted by the revelation of hidden connections. The warmth of new love, now chilled by doubt and the fear of betrayal. The trust he had finally, tentatively allowed himself to feel, now shaken to its very core by the knowledge that Grace had been keeping such a monumental secret. Standing there in the growing rain, water beginning to drip from the eaves and soak through his Sunday clothes, Ethan felt more alone and lost than he had in years. He was caught between the sharp pain of what had been lost and the terrifying uncertainty of what might still be found, between honoring his wife's memory and embracing a future that suddenly seemed far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. The rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the roof and windows like nature's own percussion section, washing the world clean while leaving Ethan feeling more stained and confused than ever. The soft glow of moonlight filtered through Lily's bedroom window, casting silvery patterns across the pale blue walls as she lay awake, staring at the familiar ceiling. Her eyes traced the shadows from the old oak tree outside, its branches swaying gently in the night breeze. Hannah was sleeping over. Their parents had agreed to honor the arrangement, despite the thick tension that now hung between the two families like storm clouds. But something wasn't right. The air felt heavy with unspoken pain. A muffled sound caught her attention, breaking through the hushed silence of the house. Quiet sobs drifted from the air mattress on the floor, barely audible but unmistakably heartbroken. The sound made Lily's chest tighten with protective instinct. Lily rolled onto her side, her cotton pajamas rustling against the sheets. "Hannah?" she whispered into the darkness, her voice gentle as a prayer. The crying stopped abruptly, followed by hurried sniffling and the rustle of covers being pulled up defensively. "Sorry." Hannah's voice was barely audible, thick with tears and shame. "I didn't mean to wake you. I tried to be quiet." Without hesitation, Lily slipped out of her warm bed, her bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. She padded across the room and sat cross-legged on the floor next to her friend, close enough to offer comfort but far enough to give space. In the dim light filtering through the gauzy curtains, she could see tears glistening on Hannah's dark cheeks like scattered diamonds. Her heart broke at the sight. "Talk to me," Lily said softly, her voice carrying the same nurturing tone she'd inherited from both her parents. "It's all my fault." Hannah choked out, her words coming between shaky breaths. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the borrowed blanket around herself like armor. "If I hadn't gotten sick. If your dad hadn't needed to donate blood that day." She pulled the soft fleece tighter around her trembling shoulders. "Now everyone's hurting because of me. Your dad can't even look at my mom anymore." "No." Lily reached out and grabbed Hannah's hand, squeezing it firmly between both of hers. Her grip was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of guilt and confusion. "You didn't ruin anything. You were just a kid who needed help. Adults make mistakes, they keep secrets and hurt each other, but love's stronger than all of that." Hannah's voice cracked with desperation. "But your dad hates us now. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me, like I'm some kind of reminder of something awful." "He doesn't hate anyone," Lily said with quiet conviction, her voice growing stronger. "Dad's not that kind of person. He's just scared, I think, and hurt. Really, really hurt. But that's not because of you. That's because the grown-ups made this mess, not you." Hannah wiped her eyes with her free hand, her breathing still uneven. "Mom cries when she thinks I'm asleep. I can hear her through the walls. She keeps saying she should have told the truth sooner, that she ruined everything good that was happening to us. Maybe she should have told him," Lily admitted honestly, her voice thoughtful rather than judgmental. "But you know what? When Dad donated blood that day, he did it because it was the right thing to do. Not because he knew who needed it. Not because of any connection or family history. He did it because someone was dying and he could help. That's what matters. That's who my dad really islanded." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still clasped, drawing strength from each other's presence. The house around them seemed to breathe with quiet understanding. Then Lily stood up abruptly, determination straightening her spine and setting her jaw in a way that would have reminded anyone who knew her mother of Sarah's fierce resolve. "Stay here," she said with newfound purpose. "I need to talk to my dad." She found Ethan in his study, still awake despite the late hour, surrounded by the warm glow of his desk lamp. He was hunched over old photo albums, their leather covers worn smooth by years of handling. Wedding pictures, baby photos, family vacations, memories of a life that felt both precious and impossibly distant. The desk lamp cast deep shadows across his tired face, highlighting the lines of grief and confusion that had deepened over the past few days. "Dad," she said from the doorway, her voice carrying a gravity that made him look up immediately. "We need to talk." He blinked in surprise, taking in her serious expression and the way she stood with her arms crossed. "Lily, it's late. You should be sleeping. Hannah's upstairs crying in my room because she thinks she destroyed our family." Lily stepped inside, her voice trembling with a mix of sadness and righteous anger. She's blaming herself for getting sick, for needing help, for existing. Is that what Mom would have wanted? For us to make an innocent girl feel like she's some kind of burden or mistake? Ethan closed the photo album slowly, his hands lingering on the cover, as if drawing strength from the memories within. It's complicated, sweetheart. There are things you don't understand about. No, it's not. Lily moved closer, placing her hands flat on his desk and leaning forward with passionate intensity. You donated blood to save a life. That's what started all this. It was beautiful and brave, and exactly what Mom always taught us to do. She used to say that love in action was the most powerful force in the world. She took a shaky breath, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Are you really going to throw away something wonderful just because you're too proud to forgive? Are you going to let fear win? Her words hung in the air between them like a challenge and a plea combined. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest, as he looked at his daughter really looked at her. She had Sarah's fire, her mother's unwavering sense of right and wrong. The anger he'd been holding onto like a shield began to crack, revealing the hurt and fear underneath. Go back to Hannah, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Take care of her. I need to think about what you've said. After Lily left, padding quietly back upstairs in her bare feet, Ethan moved from his study to his bedroom. The familiar space felt both comforting and haunting, filled with memories of the woman he'd loved and lost. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed where he and Sarah had shared so many quiet conversations, late-night planning sessions, and whispered prayers. The moonlight streaming through the gauze curtains reminded him of countless nights when she'd knelt beside this very bed. Her faith, a gentle but unwavering presence that had anchored their entire family. What would you want me to do? He whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking slightly. The silence seemed to press against him, heavy with possibility and memory. His wife's last words to him had been about grace, both the virtue and, he now realized with startling clarity, perhaps her sister too. Show grace to others, she'd said, her hand weak but her grip determined as she'd squeezed his fingers. It's how we heal. It's how we keep love alive in this broken world. The memory of Grace's face when the truth came out haunted him now in the quiet darkness. He'd been so focused on his own sense of betrayal that he'd missed the raw shame and terror in her eyes. She hadn't looked like someone who'd been caught in a manipulative lie. She'd looked like someone whose worst fear was coming true, that she would lose everything she'd dared to hope for once again. She hadn't kept the secret out of malice or calculation. She'd kept it because she was afraid of losing what they'd found together, afraid that the past would poison any chance they had at a future, just like he was doing now, letting fear and pride drive away the best thing that had happened to him since Sarah's death. Ethan knelt beside his bed, his knees touching the soft carpet where Sarah had prayed every night for their family's protection and guidance. It was something he hadn't done since his wife's passing. This act of surrender and seeking. Lord, he prayed, his voice rough with emotion and barely above a whisper, help me remember what really matters. Help me choose love over pride. Help me be the man Sarah raised Lily to expect, the man who shows grace even when it's hard. As he prayed, the knot of hurt and anger in his chest began to loosen, like a fist slowly unclenching. His wife had always believed in redemption, in second chances, in the power of forgiveness to transform even the most broken situations. She'd taught him that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice you made every day, especially when that choice felt impossible. Maybe this was his chance to honor that belief, to prove that her legacy of grace and compassion would live on through the family she'd left behind. When morning came, painting the sky in soft pastels of pink and gold, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He adjusted his collar for the 10th time, his hands slightly unsteady with nervous energy. The simple white dress shirt felt formal for a Saturday morning, but this moment deserved intention and respect. His reflection looked back at him, tired but determined, grieving but hopeful. He drove across town in the early morning light, the streets quiet except for the occasional jogger or dog walker. The flower shop was just opening when he arrived, the elderly owner, Mrs. Patterson, greeting him with knowing eyes and a gentle smile. He chose pink roses, Grace's favorite. He'd noticed from the small bouquet she'd kept in her kitchen window, each bloom perfect and fragrant with promise. Each mile toward her house after that felt like a step toward something bigger than his pride, bigger than the painful revelations of the past, bigger than his fear of loving and losing again. Now, standing on Grace's front porch with its cheerful yellow paint and hanging baskets of petunias, Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs like a drum announcing a momentous occasion. The bouquet trembled slightly in his grip as he raised his hand to knock, the morning air cool against his skin. Everything he wanted to say crowded his mind in a jumbled rush of apologies and explanations, hopes for the future and acknowledgments of the past, promises to do better and admissions of his own fears and failures. But first, before any words could bridge the gap between them, he had to take this simple, terrifying step. He had to choose courage over comfort, grace over grievance. His knuckles rapped against the painted wooden door, the sound echoing in the quiet morning air and seeming to announce to the whole neighborhood that love, despite everything, was still possible. The morning sun cast long shadows across Grace's front porch as Ethan stood there, his heart pounding against his ribs. The bouquet of pink and white roses trembled slightly in his grip. He took a deep breath and knocked. Moments stretched like hours before the door creaked open. Grace stood there, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy from crying. Her usual neat appearance was disheveled, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The sight of her pain made Ethan's chest tighten. "I'm so sorry," he said softly, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I reacted out of fear and hurt, but I should have given you a chance to explain." Grace's lips quivered as she accepted the flowers. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "Please, come in." They settled in her small living room, where family photos lined the walls. Ethan noticed one of Hannah as a baby, Grace looking young and scared but determined. The sight reminded him of his own early days as a single parent. "I need to tell you everything," Grace said, setting the flowers on the coffee table. "About Sarah, your wife, and me." She twisted her hands in her lap. "We were so close growing up, but when I fell in love with Hannah's father, our parents, they weren't accepting. Sarah sided with them at first." Ethan listened intently as Grace described the painful rift that formed between the sisters. How Sarah had later tried to reach out, to make amends, but Grace's shame and hurt had kept her away. By the time she was ready to reconcile, it was too late. "When I realized who you were at the hospital," Grace continued, wiping her eyes, "I thought it was a sign, a chance to make things right somehow. But I was afraid if you knew the truth, you'd hate me as much as I hated myself for wasting all those years." Ethan reached across and took her hand. "Sarah would have wanted us to find each other," he said gently. "She believed in forgiveness and second chances. That's what she taught Lily, and what I see in you every day." A small noise from the stairway made them both turn. Lily and Hannah stood there, holding hands, hope shining in their eyes. "Dad?" Lily's voice wavered. "Are you guys okay now?" Ethan smiled, feeling lighter than he had in days. "Come here, both of you." The girls hurried down, and Hannah flew into her mother's arms while Lily perched on the armrest next to her father. "That day at the hospital," Ethan said, looking at Grace with newfound clarity, "I thought I was just saving a stranger's life. But really, I was saving my own. You brought light back into our world, Grace. You and Hannah both." Grace's eyes welled with fresh tears, but this time she was smiling. "You gave us a family," she whispered. Over the next few days, word spread through their small town about the reconciliation. Where there had been whispers and judgment, support began to grow. Mrs. Porter, who had inadvertently revealed the truth, brought over a homemade pie and tearfully apologized for her thoughtless outburst. The local church, which had once been a place of discomfort, became a sanctuary of acceptance. The pastor spoke about the power of forgiveness and the true meaning of family. Old prejudices began to crumble as people witnessed the love and joy radiating from their blended family. One golden evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the four of them walked together through the town park. Hannah and Lily skipped ahead, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Ethan held Grace's hand, marveling at how natural it felt. "You know what I've learned?" he said, watching their daughters chase each other around a tree. "Family isn't just who you're born with, it's who you choose to love." Grace squeezed his hand, and they continued their walk, four hearts beating as one, stepping forward into their shared future together. If this story touched your heart even just a little, take a moment. Breathe it in, because sometimes the greatest miracles begin with one quiet act of kindness, and the strongest families are born not just of blood, but of love and forgiveness. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of the single dad and the nurse's journey resonated with you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your words inspire more than you know. If you believe in stories that heal, uplift, and remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Your time, your presence, your kindness, they mean the world. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop believing.